Hello. So this word missions and moonshots, we need to be super careful that it's not old wine in new bottles. And I do believe that after hearing these inspirational opening remarks, we're on a good path. But we need to be a thorn in the side because the current system, global system, the so-called ecosystem, is actually not moving at pace. There's some countries that might be leading, but what does it actually mean to transform how public and private actors work together on the biggest challenges of our time? And this conference is fundamental because it tells us it's not just about climate, it's not just about biodiversity, it's not just about land and water, it's the interconnections between them. And how can we actually transform our economies for real in terms of how we create value, ex ante, not ex post, to tackle the water challenges, the biodiversity challenges, and the climate challenges that actually go through all our sectors. And it also requires a joined-up approach inside our governments. It's not just for the Department of Water, Department of Energy, it's just as much for the Department of Finance to rethink how to do finance, the structure of finance. And if we don't do this, we get this really boring narrative that it's about, filling financial gaps, as though there's a hole to fill. You just put in a lot of money and somehow magic comes out. So what I've been doing for some years, apologies if this is a bit self-promotional, but hey, academics write books and then we talk about them, has been to change that narrative away from thinking about fixing market failures, a bit of a patchy thing here and there for government to invest in a bit of R&D, and then we have venture capital, and then we stir the soup and somehow innovation comes about. What we need is a decentralized network of entrepreneurial state institutions working across the whole innovation chain with the private sector. That's how Silicon Valley happened. Every technology in your phone that makes your phone a smartphone and not a stupid phone was actually not only government financed, but actually through purpose, problem-oriented agencies, driving public and private partnerships to actually solve problems. The internet solved the problem of getting the satellites to communicate. That was DARPA. GPS, that was the Navy in the US wanting to know where the ships were. And if you go technology by technology, in so many cases, these were mission-oriented, purpose-oriented organizations that were confident of their role and then worked well with private institutions. And in all my books, especially Mission Economy, that I wrote about 6 years ago, it's all about how do we then rethink, what does that actually mean? Not just to talk about missions and moonshots, but actually to bring that to the center of our policy design process or institutions. And what kind of government capacity, the dynamic capabilities inside state institutions do we need instead of what? Consultifying, McKinsey-fying, Deloitte-ifying our civil service. And I really hope the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia thinks about this, because I think you can lead if we actually also invest within the brains of government. And that, by the way, was a big warning call by the head of NASA back in the 1960s when he saw actually how much outsourcing was already happening back then. And he said, we will get captured by brochuremanship if we continue to do this. Because what did he want? He wanted the public and the private actors to work together with extreme intelligence, collective intelligence, a sexy word, but how do we turn that into a real new way of working together? And the first thing they did was to change how they were working. They realized that the way they were doing government purchasing programs, otherwise known as procurement, was really boring and static. It was all just cost plus. And they changed it to challenge-oriented procurement. Don't forget, every government in the world often spends around 20 to 30% of their budgets just buying stuff, whether it's hospital beds or cement or renewable energy, buying things in order to govern the economy. And they said, we can't continue to do it in a boring way. We will change procurement to be purpose-oriented to solve all those different problems that the astronauts had going to the moon. What would they wear? How would they go to the bathroom, literally? How and what would they eat? So it was the solution to all those problems that got us all these technologies: camera phones, foil blankets, baby formula, baby diapers, software, right? So a purpose-oriented public institutions that set these really ambitious problems and then work with the private sector, but with conditionality. By the way, I don't know if you saw that little red line there. Where is it? No excess profits, NASA said. Not no profits. Profits are fine. It's capitalism, right? But not in excess. In excess of what? Of what you're doing, right? So collective intelligence means sharing risks and sharing rewards. And you only do that if you have confidence of your own role. You're not de-risking, a word I really dislike. You're welcoming uncertainty. You're taking on the risks, but you're sharing risks and rewards. And what does this mean then for policy design? What is a mission-oriented approach to innovation? Thank you very much for using that word. It's a very important word if we use it as a thorn. It means starting with the challenges, the land challenges, the water challenges, the biodiversity challenges, the climate challenges. And by the way, we've all signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. Those are the challenges. Turning them, though, into moonshots that are inspirational, they're bold, they're a clear direction where you can actually say, yes or no, did you achieve it? Instead of just blah, 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 as the teenagers have told us that we're doing. And doing it in such a way that by design requires many different sectors. To get to the moon, it was not just aerospace. It was nutrition, materials, electronics, of course aerospace, but all those different things, again, that the astronauts needed to do in the lunar modules required an intersectoral approach, and then changing those tools, whether it's subsidies, guarantees, loans, procurement, during COVID, bailouts to particular companies that can no longer work during lockdowns, to stimulate bottom-up innovation. So it's a top-down direction, and these are the goals, right? We've signed up to them, but bottom-up innovation. If it's top-down innovation, we will never get the kind of entrepreneurship and innovation system. So I had the honor to not just write the book, but then to go around the world and to talk about what a mission-oriented moonshot approach is. And with the European Commission, I managed to convince them. So today there's a missions instrument in Europe. I was hoping it would go to the center of government, so at the cabinet level. It's stuck right now in the innovation DG RTD. And this is critical because the point of missions and moonshots is go to the center of government to really foster then not only the intersectoral approach, but the interministerial approach. And NASA, by the way, knew this. They changed their bureaucracy precisely in order to foster horizontal communication between their different departments. And it was one of the astronauts that when he died, Gus Grissom, you might remember the Apollo 1 fire, on the day that those 3 astronauts died, he said, how the bleep, bleep, bleep will we get to the moon if we can't even talk between 2 or 3 buildings? Because those poor astronauts could not hear what was being said in mission control room. And on the back of that, NASA changed its bureaucracy to be much more flexible and agile. So any mission-oriented government must indeed change its bureaucracy. The project managers, each with their delegated teams, but in constant communication with each other. And I also just had the honor to co-chair the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. Co-chaired it with Tarmeng Shamutaran, the current president of Singapore, and Gazio Conjiwila, the head of the WTO, and Johan Rockstrom. And we brought this mission-oriented approach to the center of the water problem, which is a global problem, the global hydrological cycle. So water, of course, unites us all. Deforestation in the Amazon has been shown by scientists like my co-chair, Johan Rockstrom, to actually be responsible for droughts or floods in other parts of the world. So we are connected. It also is connected through all the different sectors in the economy, but also through all those different SDGs. So transforming missions around water into challenge, mission, intersectoral, bottom-up innovation. That's what we need to do. We need to bring all sorts of challenges like this one here, reduce water use in agriculture by 1/3 while increasing crop yields, cross-sectoral, bottom-up, cut leakages and non-revenue water in half by 2030. And by the way, fantastic that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been so bold in terms of setting those different missions. But how can we again do it in a very clear way that puts those problems at the center of an innovation strategy, an industrial strategy, but also that gets the finance ministries to understand how to evaluate this? Why? Think again of that moon landing that I talked about. Even if they had blown up before getting to the moon, they still would have gotten all those innovations along the way, those dynamic spillovers. And yet we often have static, not dynamic metrics in our finance ministries that like to use these things like cost-benefit analysis, net present value. The question is, again, putting missions and moonshots at the center, how do we evaluate and value differently? And I'm sure we're going to talk about this in the panel. But what does it mean for institutional design, the social contract between public and private actors, co-creation and participation? The more we can get our citizens excited about this. Remember the young people looking up at the sky and all those people going into sciences, the STEM subjects, because they were inspired by the Apollo mission. What is the equivalent around your missions today? How do we get kids to want to even go work into government because it becomes the coolest place to be to work with the private sector and those dynamic capabilities? Without an all-of-government approach, it's not going to happen. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, like many other countries, have currently different agencies or organizations that might be committed to different parts of our climate, biodiversity, water, and land areas. But again, a joined-up approach is absolutely central. And of course, these different organizations are important, but if they all remain dispersed, we know that problems can arise. So the tools matter. The institutions matter. How we evaluate matters. And really quickly, I have very little time left, I just wanted to give you a flavor. In Italian, we'd say un'infarinata, put a bit of flour on the meat before you fry it up, in terms of just giving you a bit of seeds of inspiration on what it means to, again, put these ideas at the center of the tools. In Europe, I helped to get the European Investment Bank to think about this. If the European Investment Bank will be the climate bank, it's probably going to have to become a bit less nervous about risk and just worrying about their AAA rating. Of course, the ratings matter, but if this is about taking on uncertainty, sharing risks, sharing rewards, we need to also change how we govern risk and think about these portfolios in different ways. And again, maybe it's something we can talk about in the panel. If you look globally, by the way, at how much public money exists, you realize this isn't about filling financial gaps, but restructuring finance. There's over 20.2 trillion in national banks, over 2.2 trillion in multilateral development banks, like the IDB in Latin America, like the EIB that I just mentioned, like the African Development Bank. But if it's not joined up, we don't get where the sum is bigger than the parts. You just get a lot of little projects being funded. Take my mission map and reverse it. You just get projects falling on the heads of different global and national agencies. Procurement, as I mentioned, we should normalize moonshots, right? It's not about space, it's about school lunch. Imagine if every school lunch in the world was healthy, tasty, and sustainable, and had that sustainability of how we actually make food. Even get kids excited, because remember how much everyone loves lunch when they're in school, and get also participatory structures that I talked about in terms of that co-design and co-creation process. But ultimately, this is about supply chains. How do we get the supply chain of food to become more innovative, dynamic, and have that outcomes-oriented, mission-oriented approach? Reward sharing, critical. Otherwise, what happens? We end up with what we got in Silicon Valley: socialization of risk, privatization of rewards. And that's a whole other conversation, but you know what I'm talking about. So lots of interesting work that I've been doing around conditionality. If people don't like that word, think of reciprocity. Think of ecosystems that can either be parasitic or mutualistic and symbiotic. Biologists, by the way, are much more rigorous about this than economists. What does a symbiotic, mutualistic ecosystem look like in terms of actually embedding conditionality in any contract, whether it's a property right, a water right? 80% of industrial wastewater is not recycled. That's crazy, given that the water rights are given by the state to Anheuser-Busch or Pepsi-Cola. put it in the contract, and make that actually then drive innovation. Regulation, if it's done well, will drive and stimulate problem solving. Capabilities matter. I've said that. That's why I just wrote a book about this. The big con, how we have infantilized our governments. That word was used by this man here, Theodore Agnew, a conservative Tory lord in the UK government, who said, "What's happened? We've stopped investing within our civil service." And he saw how much was being outsourced during COVID and Brexit. And he said, our civil servants are there to actually govern the crunchiest, most wicked problems of our time. And we've just been outsourcing it and then hurting those capabilities. And I did a study recently with UNDP looking also in the developing world, where during COVID, some of the countries that did the best were those who had invested within Kerala, Rwanda, Togo. Very interesting. For example, the infodemic side of COVID. GovLabs are incredible tools to do exactly what we heard about in those introductory remarks, the sandboxing. That means actually allowing yourself to fail. Trial and error. GovLabs throughout our different ministries. Again, this is always about partnership. And just to finish, this is probably the biggest challenges we have today. How do we govern our ecosystem to be problem-oriented? How do we do it at the local level, at the regional level, at the national level, but of course at the global level? Because the global hydrological cycle unites us all, but if we remain static and boring and a bit depressed and consultified, it's not going to happen. Thank you so much.